This is the last video in the CAM project #1 series. This is the Raise nameplate. We've gone through several videos to show you essentially how to get started creating a model, um, creating a work setup, putting tools in your tool library, creating these machining operations, simulating. And this video is going to show you, once you have all that done, how do you get this to actually spit out your G code? Well, what we need to do is what's called a post process, where we essentially tell the machine the parameters, or excuse me, tell Fusion the parameters of the CNC machine that we're going to be using so it can customize the G code for that machine. So that means you actually need to have the post, essentially the post parameters from your machine to make this work. Now, if we right click on setup, and there, like anything, is more than one way to do it here. If I go to post process, it's going to pull up the post process menu here. And this is where you need to have the configuration folder for your machine and put it in here. One of the machines we have available that we use frequently is the Forest Scientific router. And as you can see, since that's what I use a lot, the post processing configuration folder is actually here. And what I do is browse, find it, and you actually just select the folder, and then what you should do is make sure that's the only option in that folder, and then the machine pulls it up. So that is step one. And if you don't have that, then that's something that you can usually get from the manufacturer of your product. You just tell them you need the configuration folder for Fusion, and you have to let them know that it's Fusion, because each and every G code producing program will have a customized folder for that. So for the post configuration, this is essentially, when you see it pop up here, this is the post processor used. You can search it. Some of the defaults, I believe, are in here, but the Forest Scientific was a little more, it's probably not quite as common, so that I had to drop the configuration in here, like I was explaining earlier. The output folder is where the post is actually going to go. So I have a folder dedicated for the Forest Scientific router, and I call it post files. No big mystery there. And that's where it is going to create the programs. And the program name is going to be what you essentially told the computer you wanted to name it in the setup folder. But if you want to change that, you still can right now. You're going to have a 4-digit name or number traditionally in here, or that is the program name. And then you, in the comments, is where I recommend to really make sure that there's no ambiguity about what program this is. When you get to the point where you have lots of programs, if you don't have a really good way of determining which is what, and even what version it is, you're going to have a really big problem when you want to go back and machine something. So I always recommend put an unambiguous name and even a version of it as well. I'm going to be using inches. That is the scale for my machine, and that's my preferred scale. You do need to make sure that if your machine has a tool changer or doesn't, that it reflects in this little submenu. Optional stops. This is, a lot of this is user preference, but some of this is what is the capability of your machine. For the G code sequence numbers, I prefer the increment of 10 to start at 1, so that I can go in there, and if I need to make changes or additions to the G code, which I frequently do, then I can do that, and there's space for it. By creating by tens, I can do 2 through 9 and have extra lines in there as well, without losing the number of my lines. I usually like to write the tools so I know exactly what tool is being loaded where. But this is, for the most part, default. I think I only changed 1 or 2 things in here. So once I am comfortable with everything in here and it's correct, you simply press the post button. And it's going to, as you can see, double check your post file and name. Click save. And yes, I'm going to overwrite that. And if you give it a minute, it's actually going to open up your G-code. This is one of the options that I had checked, was to open up my G-code. So as you can see here, there are quite a few lines of G-code. Let's see, what am I at lines-wise? 16,000, almost 17,000 codes of line, or lines of code, excuse me. So the computer writes a lot of code, a lot more than if we were to program this ourselves, because there's a lot of reasons for it. But just one of the primary examples is a lot of times instead of using G2s and 3s, the computer will use lots of little G1s. So if you can imagine a whole circle, that would add up to a lot of lines of code for, what we would think would be minimal movements, but that's the way the computer does it. Now, you can see right at the top, by writing tools, I can see my tool 1 and diameter are in place here. My tool 2 diameter and some other information are there. I think that's really important. That's why I like to write tools. You can see some of the other codes it uses. And yeah, sometimes, like I said, I choose to change things. Sometimes I will use maybe move operations around, and I don't have access to my folder, but I can use, or to my Fusion folder, but I can use a notepad file, and I use the tools to kind of tell me whereabouts my operations beginning and end. So if I were to Control F, let's just say tool 2, let's see where that happens at. So it only occurs twice, which it should. So there's one at the beginning here and one at the end. What if I do tool 1? It should show me where that changes. And as you can see here near the bottom, it changes to tool 1. And that's where the second contour operation starts. So say I wanted to cut this out and make it a separate operation, I could actually do that without going into Fusion and doing that. So it's nice to have that flexibility. But that's probably just a shade more advanced. What's most important here is that you understand what exactly this G-code is. For my machines, I use the thumb drive shuffle, so I will save this to a thumb drive and then take that thumb drive over to my machine and load my program that way. But this is the CAM post. This is what the computer knows how to read and execute to a CNC machine and create the product that you want. So through this series of videos, we've gone all the way from the design to spitting out G-code. If you apply these same principles and lessons to pretty much any design out there, you should be able to get the G-code output to actually go make what you want to make. So hope this guys has helped you out a lot. And, I'm sure there'll be more videos to come as things get a little more complex, but this is definitely the meat and potatoes of creating CNC programs on Fusion 360.